Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Econ Playground. What I wanted to do today is just make a short video introducing the concepts of cosmos and taxis to the people of this little corner, or TLC. What is the TLC for people who don't know? Well, I don't really know, and that's part of what this video is about, is trying to help figure out what it is. But it will suffice for now, for those of you who don't know, to just search Paul Vanderklay on YouTube or on Google and go from there, figure out where that takes you. Or also you can start searching around on thislittlecorner.com, the link here. Thanks to our friend Jacob for sharing that with me. And in the TLC, there has been a lot of discussion about what sort of thing the TLC is. People have been talking about this question or some version of this question for as long as I've really been following Paul's channel and the people that surround him before TLC was called TLC. And what I hope to do with this video is provide some useful terms from my field of expertise, that is economics, that might shed some light on this discussion and might be useful for people to pick up. So what I'm going to be talking about is basically based on a chapter from Friedrich Hayek's book, Law, Legislation, and Liberty, which was published in 3 volumes across the 1970s. If you don't know who Hayek is, he's one of the more prominent Nobel laureates in economics. Got the Nobel in about 1974 for work for 30 years before that, and he and other things since. This is a list of some of his more famous works. But what this work was it was really a distillation and systemization of his earlier work on social orders and the difference between market orders, socialist, planned, unplanned economies, and political authoritarianism, and how political institutions interact with those kinds of orders. But this is one of the early sort of foundational chapters in the book that he just defines some terms and then defines some concepts that he can work with later in the book. I don't need to get into that stuff, but the simple ideas that he presents here are sufficient and very interesting. So he starts off the chapter asking the question, what is order? He says a lot of people are scared to use this word order because it's associated with various authoritarian regimes. We're going to impose order on our chaotic society with a hard boot, with the police, at the point of a gun. That's what order means, is to violently oppress one group of people or to impose some sort of order on some sort of chaos. He says, but we can have a more innocent definition that would include that kind of order, perhaps, but just it describes something that you might actually find attractive. So this is the way that he defines it. An order describes a state of affairs in which a multiplicity of elements of various kinds are so related to each other that we may learn from our acquaintance with some spatial or temporal part of the whole to form correct expectations concerning the rest, or at least expectations which have a good chance of proving correct. So basically, what he's saying is order is in some zone where there's a multiplicity of elements, so there's a potential for chaos. There's a potential for you to imagine these things diverging from one another. They conform to some sort of pattern, or there's some sort of regularity to all of the different elements of this system. These can be people, these can be objects, these can be thoughts, patterns, these can be all sorts of things. A very abstract definition of order. And another thing he says about this definition is that any given order itself is only defined by the relation between these elements. So you can think of it like a Theseus ship sort of problem. The boat is an order of where wood is placed in a certain location, right? And so if you replace board by board, the order of the boat remains even though all of the elements have been replaced, right? So this is what he means by order. He also interestingly defines it from one person's perspective, from someone having expectations about something, right? So this is not just some sort of abstract pattern that you should think of as separate from yourself. This is someone actually observing something, generating expectations about something, and then orienting themselves with respect to some sort of order. So what he goes to next is distinguishing between 2 sorts of order. So these are both the same in that there's some sort of pattern of which you can have regular expectations about. And he refers to these 2 different Greek words, cosmos and taxis. A cosmos is a self-organizing sort of order, right? Where it was not imposed like an intentional taxis, right? But the order, the pattern of these elements sort of comes out of, well, we'll get into that. The order was not part of someone's imagination. It was not imposed on each single element, right? So sometimes he says the order that results from a cosmos, we think of these as an organism, right? Like a body, like a biology, you think of the evolutionary process. Whereas a taxis, which is intentional, part of someone's imagination and design and planning, we call that an organization, some explicit intentional organization. Sometimes he refers to a cosmos as a spontaneous order, where order comes out of disorder by some means, and a taxis is a planned order, like someone's schedule or someone's battle plans or something like that, right? And one of the differences between a cosmos and taxis we'll get into a little bit more is that cosmos are generated from abstract rules, from all of those elements that are conforming to the pattern. They reach that pattern because they were following some abstract rule. Whereas in a taxis, those elements are in the position they are in the pattern because they were ordered to be in that position, because that's what would make them conform to the pattern, right? So just since these are ancient Greek words, you can think of some of the descendants of these. Cosmology, obviously the order of the entire galaxy universe. We think of these as the cosmology is the study of that, which is not necessarily pinpoint planned by one single agent. Cosmetics, apparently, I looked this up, it refers to the certain kinds of cosmetics is supposed to make the person or the face look more natural, more like the natural order. That one kind of surprised me. And then the somewhat familiar terms microcosm and macrocosm, right? They obviously fit this sort of order or pattern. In a taxis, also you might think of the words taxonomy, like an intentional assigning different names or to different objects, or placing different objects in different taxonomic categories in order to fit some sort of classificatory purpose. Taxidermy, derm meaning like skin, is putting the skin in a very intentional place so that it looks like that creature is still alive. And then syntax refers to the order in which you are placing or organizing different words in a sentence. So it's a linguistic term, but it's also a term that's used in coding. So both of these are clearly orders, in that the end result of these processes is a pattern, something that you can expect regularity from, but they are generated in very different ways. So here's some examples, and these sort of correspond with one another. One example of a cosmos is our natural language, right? You can expect that when I say the word coconut, I'm referring to a particular kind of object, and I expect that you will expect me to be referring to that particular kind of object when we are in this linguistic pattern called English, right? The words that we all say to one another tend to generate common knowledge or common expectations about the world. But those words don't mean those things because at some point someone decided to create a new language called English. English is a mixture of a lot of different words and sounds referring to different things, and then the order, the grammar of English also is self-generated. And then when we learn grammar in elementary school, they're looking backwards and seeing how people have figured things out, and then teaching kids so they can get up to speed with where everyone else is, right? Whereas a taxonomy, so back like what I just mentioned, is a very intentional assigning of different words or names to different objects for a particular purpose, for a scientific purpose, or for some technical coding purpose. I would think of, in data analysis, assigning variable names to mean certain things. This is, you're developing names to refer to particular kinds of objects for a particular purpose that you have in mind as the namer, right? And this is going to be a comprehensive list of names for all animals or for all variables in your data set. In law, common law is a lot of looking back on precedent, looking back on the patterns that judges can derive from the judgments of people in days past. And so different patterns of law develop, not because any particular person said this is going to be what the laws are for our land, but because many judges over time came to agreements about certain things. So you can expect a pattern in the decisions of judges or in the decisions of juries, but nobody ever ordered the entire set of judges to judge in a particular way in a particular set of cases. Statutory law is more like a taxis, where a legislative body decides this is how we're going to ask people to act in a certain way, in a certain direction, right? There is an intended order of society that law is aiming towards. Obviously, this is the economics angle, the difference between market production and production within a firm. So sometimes a single object is produced from all of the different people working together unintentionally, buying and selling from one another, and eventually creating the entire market order from which you can regularly expect bread will be on the shelves at a certain price, right? Nobody planned the prices. Nobody planned who should be putting bread where, but I moved to a new area and there's a grocery store right there, and I can expect the bread will basically be within my income. And that was not planned whatsoever, but there's still order to production there, as opposed to production within a firm, or you might, well, I'll get to that in a second. The production within a firm, within a company, you have a boss. He says, this is what we're going to be making today. This is your job. This is your job. This is your job. And you're producing something. We expect to have, this is our quota for the day, and we expect to reach it. And we reach it because everyone was following their orders. That's also a kind of production. That's also a kind of order within the factory. This also relates to Smith's invisible hand, and the idea of national economic planning. This is obviously very relevant for Hayek in the way he's using it. Another cosmos you can think of are the patterns of warfare, the general things that you might learn in an international relations class, as opposed to an actual general's battle plan, the individual orders that he gives all of the different soldiers. That's in the arena of warfare. So what's super important about the difference between cosmos and taxis is how they're generated, right? They're not different things because one is order and one is chaos. They're both kinds of order, but they're generated by different processes, right? So a cosmos is generated from individual elements behaving according to abstract rules. A cosmos is not just like our lucky day, things ended up being ordered, right? Usually there was some sort of principle operating behind each one of these elements that they were following independently, and because of some subsidiary process, they end up in a ordered pattern, right? Whereas in a taxis, things are also similarly in an ordered pattern, but they're there because some command giver, someone giving orders, specifically wanted each element to be in its place so that it would fit the pattern. That pattern was in the mind of the order giver before he gives each individual particular command. So taxis comes from concrete orders to, you go in this position, you go in this position, whereas a cosmos is maybe something like everyone go where they feel fits best, and some sort of order is generated from those people's feelings. And one thing that Hayek wants you to note about the difference between these two things is you feel like, okay, as long as we can generate order, it doesn't really matter which one we use. But he says what he really wants to point out by distinguishing between these two things is there's certain kinds of orders that can only be generated from cosmos, from abstract rules. Why is that? Because sometimes those elements know certain things about themselves that the command giver does not know. They have some sort of private knowledge, or there's some fact about themselves that maybe they can't even articulate, that they can't even reveal, maybe that they don't even know at the outset, that because of them following the abstract rule, that additional fact might get integrated into the final order. I'll give a good example in a moment, right? So in a cosmos, you have a little bit less control over it, right? But you're able to integrate private knowledge or private facts into the eventual order. Whereas a taxis is more direct, more definite. These things will be fitting a very particular pattern that you might want, but you can't, without some sort of additional process, or without perhaps employing a cosmos within the taxis, which is something that Hayek says is possible. So you shouldn't think of these things as too strictly divided from one another. You might be able to, you won't be able to access the private knowledge inside of each of these individuals. So yeah, and yeah, I'll get to that in a bit. So this is a very good example that Hayek gives, which is the example of iron filings and a magnet, right? So if this red bar is a magnet with a north pole and a south pole, right? And then each one of these iron filings is just something that's attracted by the magnet, you can see there is a clear sort of pattern here. It's not a perfect pattern, but you can expect these iron filings to sort of, they fit in sort of these ellipses here, and over here they're splaying out from basically the magnetic field. I don't know exactly how the magnet works, but the iron filings are fitting to some degree the pattern of the magnetic field that the magnet itself is producing. So you can think of each one of these iron filings as following the rule orient yourself relative to the magnetic field, right? And what you get is this beautiful pattern that's somewhat elliptical. So you might think of the eventual order as I can expect the iron filings to be in some sort of elliptical arrangement, but they're not there because someone put them in an elliptical arrangement with an elliptical arrangement in mind. All that they said was, I'm going to put this magnet here and the iron filings are going to follow the laws of magnetism. And you end up with the eventual pattern. Now you can imagine this same pattern being achieved through a Taxis method as well. You can think, well, this iron bar, maybe it's not maybe it's demagnetized. You can take this picture that I'm showing you, take all the same iron filings and put them in exactly that order. It'd be very difficult, but it is possible to generate a Taxis that is this same exact order. But so it's a good example of the same order that can be generated by both a Cosmos or a Taxis. But yeah, so a Taxis cannot simply subsume any Cosmos. Just because you know what the eventual order or pattern that you want is, what eventual pattern you want, you can't just put all of the pieces in the positions that you'd want them to be in. Because sometimes the pattern that you want includes that inarticulable secret knowledge. So another good example would be two magnets ordering themselves by reverse polarity, right? So if I put two magnets that are, and I want the eventual pattern to be south matches north and north matches south, if these are magnetized bars, I can just put them on the table and they'll orient themselves such that south matches north and north matches south, right? But if I just have a picture of these two bars and they're not labeled, the north and south poles are not labeled, then I won't be able to, as a Taxis, just place those bars in exactly that position by giving them direct particular commands. I have to put them there and have faith, in a sense, that abstract rule, the laws of magnetism, is going to orient them into the pattern that is where I want them to actually be, where the reverse poles are touching one another, right? So if you're in any situation where the elements that you want to arrange in some sort of pattern have some sort of inarticulable knowledge, or have some, maybe that they're not even aware of themselves, or they have some sort of quality that they don't know how to offer themselves, or people have different interpretations of the same fact, such that nobody can actually speak the same language about what they are, what particular elements or facts they're going to be contributing to the eventual pattern, then a Taxis is not going to be sufficient to put those things in order. And another thing he talks about is like Taxis can only handle a certain level of complexity, both because the actual minds that will be envisioning the eventual pattern and placing all of those elements in the pattern can only do so many degrees of computation, but also because those minds won't be able to actually put the things in the complexity for all of the things that those minds themselves cannot grasp ex ante before the actual process undergoes. So if you're familiar with these kind of debates, what Hayek really wants to focus on here is the idea that in a market, many people know their own talents, they know where resources are, and they have new potential ideas for how to reorganize production. So if you imposed a plan on the entire economy, you would be suppressing basically all of these particular agents with local knowledge from being able to offer what they can to the market, and rather the market, just the abstract rules of people following contracts and respecting property, and then price signals varying and trying to attract people to various points of information, that actually organizes all of this private knowledge much better than any planner who has a vision beforehand in his head. So the market process is actually generating the knowledge that it needs to achieve its own goal, in a sense. So another place that he goes with this is he talks about something called the Great Society, which is a very strange name. Most people don't use it outside of talking about this chapter in particular because it's too close to the actual, progressive platform in the 60s. But he uses the term the Great Society to refer to the totality of all orders. So all elements achieving some sort of grand pattern, right? That grand pattern is much looser. Things deviate from it all the time. Focusing on a particular thing you're going to find a much more regular order. But the Great Society is what he refers to as the totality of all orders. And he says at the highest level, the Great Society, if there's order in that Great Society, it has to be an example of cosmos, not taxis. If one element or one part of that order was to try to assert its plan, on the rest of society, then his plan and him offering it and everyone else following it would also be an emergent process that you would define as a cosmos. So even if there is a king of the universe who everyone is obeying all of his commands, or king, let's just even limit it to Earth. If there's a king of our society that everyone is following his demands, everyone following those demands is also a result of people deciding to follow that abstract rule, right? So the highest level of order is always a cosmos, right? You can even talk about this as the relationship between God and his creation when it is ordered is a cosmos. That is, someone might get into a debate, free will, no free will, depends to what degree you believe in determinism, things like that. But in my tradition, the way I understand it, the relationship between God and creation is a cosmos. He invites those things into order and he gives them natures such that they can obey them and fit into a larger order. Hayek also notes sometimes, because a lot of people in the TLC have talked about the word body, or is the TLC a body or an institution or something like that. He says the word body has been used as a metaphor for authoritarian societies or authoritarian governments, but in truth, this is actually a bad metaphor, he thinks, that real bodies are more like cosmos than taxis. So you can think of all of these cells acting according to their own basic physical or biological laws, but they end up conforming to the pattern of the whole body. Maybe you can think of it as defined by the pattern that is in DNA, right? So yeah, my head, I can do particular things. I can place my hands in particular ways. So maybe if I'm dancing, right, the positions of my body are a taxis, right? But my heartbeat, the way that I regenerate, new cells if I get a cut, those are all cosmos. And there's many things I can expect out of my body that seem miraculous because it doesn't feel like anyone's planning them. I'm not using my mind to make sure that my body functions. I'm using my mind to make sure that certain aspects of my body are directed in certain ways, but the entirety of my life is very much a cosmos. So to our example, or to the task at hand, the TLC, is it a cosmos or a taxis? Well, obviously it's some of both, right? The great corner, that is, whatever the boundaries of TLC are and how it relates to the things beyond those boundaries, will always be a cosmos, right? Like Hayek says. Um, but particularly focusing on what a cosmos can do that a taxis cannot do, which is take the things that the elements themselves don't know, or that the potential command givers don't know about people. If people are going to be able to volunteer that information or figure out, where it might fit in the grander pattern of the TLC, it's preferable to order things by norms and rules rather than commands and orders and direction, right? Um, so a Taxis version of the TLC, where Paul tells people when they're going to do rando slots, or Paul tells people who's allowed to start a channel and who has streams when, and things like that, would suffer from overlooked members, too many repeat topics, and the surprising things that show up and then get integrated into the whole, or the surprising things that show up and just get shunted and no one pays attention to them. We wouldn't have that, right? Um, but taxes are obviously very useful as well. Each channel, Discord, or document that people write in or something like that has strong elements of a taxis. There are server moderators that go, this is getting out of line. I'm going to stop this particular thing. Sometimes the taxis operates much quicker and much more efficiently than a Cosmos might, right? So sometimes people get a little bit confused and they think, oh, Hayek makes such great points about self-generating processes. We should never try to control anything. That's not true at all, right? It's spontaneous disorder can sometimes develop. Just any set of rules does not necessarily generate order. It's sometimes the very, very carefully, sometimes crafted, sometimes emergent set of rules is what develops a spontaneous order that we actually can enjoy the fruits of, right? Like you can think of companies or firms in a market are little islands of planning in a large, unplanned free market economy, something like that. So this is a question that I'll ask people that I don't really know the answer to. If the TLC is a cosmos, if there is indeed order and identity to the TLC, what are the abstract rules that it's following? In a market, people are profit seeking. Some people make some money in some small cases, mostly just to cover budgets for a conference or something like that. But you wouldn't say that people's decisions in the TLC are driven by profit, right? Are they love-seeking? To some degree, but that feels a little bit too abstract, and it doesn't really pin down what we're talking about. Or is it just a random process? Is it trial and error, and we just really lucked out? I don't know. I'll just leave one final point, which might be a little bit controversial, which is that Hayek seems to be very insistent that a cosmos cannot have a telos in the same way that a taxis can. A taxis has the very intentional vision of a planner, and then they like a color by number kind of thing, and then they place all of the elements that they want in the order so that it fits that eventual pattern. That's how he thinks of a telos, right? And he thinks a cosmos, if it has a telos, would not work, right? A cosmos would not be a cosmos if the eventual pattern was baked into the original rules, right? That would just be an example of a taxis. I don't know entirely if I agree with him here. I don't know exactly what it matters for. I think he's honestly making that point so that he can make other subsidiary points he makes in the book about social justice and such. But I don't know. Yeah, perhaps. And then the last thought was, if a cosmos is to have a telos, perhaps that telos has to be abstract, like the rules of a cosmos. So that's where I'll leave that, and I hope this is useful to people.